Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 12, and my name is Janet Szabo. I will be your guide as we explore all things sewing. It's now the week after Thanksgiving. I've returned from my travels. I celebrated my birthday, and today's episode is going to be a recap of all of the fun fiber and fabric things I did last week. I left Montana on Friday morning, November 18th, to drive to Spokane. Spokane is about halfway between Kalispell and Seattle. Seattle was my destination, but during the winter especially, I like to break up that trip into 2 days. It's dark in the morning and it's dark in the evening, and there isn't a lot of daylight for driving, so the last thing I want to do is hit a deer on the way to Seattle, so I'll often wait until it gets light out and drive halfway to Spokane and spend the night. When I got to Spokane, I drove around to all of the Walmarts and checked the remnant racks to see if there were any goodies. I found a few things. It was interesting to me that about the first half dozen pieces of fabric that I picked up were all navy blue or navy blue prints. Navy blue seems to be a big color this year. Some years it's next to impossible to find anything navy blue. I remember looking for a pair of navy blue pants a couple years ago and they weren't to be had anywhere. But this year navy blue seems to be a big color. So I picked up a few pieces that are probably going to end up being Harper cardigans or some kind of pullover. There were some sweater knits, a couple of ponte knits, just a lot of fun things to play around with. Some I'll use for muslins and some will become actual garments or class samples. I also visited a couple of Joann fabric stores. The Joann fabric stores in Spokane are a little bit bigger than the one here in Kalispell, but honestly, they're not in much better shape than ours is. And I didn't find anything on the remnant racks. All the remnant racks were 75% off, and they were pretty well cleaned off. So I didn't buy anything at any of the Joann fabric stores. I also went to the Quilting Bee, which is a huge quilting store in Spokane. I like to pop in there, although again, I didn't really find anything that I absolutely had to come home with, so I didn't buy anything there. I spent the night in Spokane, and then Saturday morning I woke up early and hit the road again and headed to Seattle. There's a town called Moses Lake, Washington, which is about halfway between Spokane and Seattle. I always stop in Moses Lake because it's a good place to stretch my legs, get some coffee, and there's a Walmart and a Joann Fabrics in close proximity. So I hit both of those stores. Again, I didn't find anything at either one and ended up leaving empty-handed, but that was okay. As I got toward Seattle, I stopped in the little suburb of Issaquah, which is on the east side of Seattle, off of I-90, just after you come over Snoqualmie Pass. There's a quilt store there called the Gossypium Quilt Store, or Gossypium Quilts, and Gossypium is the Latin botanical name for cotton, in case you were wondering. My mother had given me some spending money for my birthday, so I treated myself to 2 fat quarter bundles of Tilda fabric. I don't have any Tilda fabric. I found some in a blue colorway that I really liked, so I bought 2 fat quarter bundles, and I will probably make that into some kind of quilt or wall hanging for myself as a birthday treat. Right down the street from the quilt store is a Hobby Lobby, so I popped in there. And I also stopped in at Issaquah Sew and Vac, which is a neat little store. They have lots and lots of pre-cuts, fat quarters, layer cakes, jelly rolls. They carry lots and lots of different fabric lines. They've got a huge selection of AccuQuilt dyes And they also carry a lot of Wonderful thread and other kinds of thread. So I popped in there to see if there was anything that I needed there. It's always fun just to check in at these places and see what kinds of things they're getting in. My younger daughter, the one who works at Nordstrom as a buyer, lives in Seattle, and she was the one that I was spending most of last week with. She has an apartment close to downtown. I found an Airbnb about 10 minutes away, and it was a very lovely and comfortable Airbnb, and I had brought my little Janome Gem sewing machine with me. So I set that up on the kitchen table or on the dining room table in the Airbnb and spread out some of my projects to work on during the week while I was there. I brought 4 mini charm packs with me. Moda has a free pattern for a little zipper pouch bag type of thing using mini charms. And you just sew 40 mini charms together, 8 rows by 5 charms in each row. And I decided that that would be a good project to take with me since I had 4 of those charm packs. So I worked on that during the week. On Sunday, my daughter and I made a trip to Costco because she doesn't have a Costco card. So when Mom comes to visit, we always make a trip to Costco. We stopped in at the Joann Fabrics that's nearby, and I picked up a bolt of Pellon Easy pattern. That's the tracing paper that I like to use, or tracing material. And all the Pellon interfacing was 50% off last week, so it was a good time to stock up. I should back up and note that on Saturday we went to the Seattle neighborhood called Ballard. I am back here in Montana and it is so dry here. I'm sorry about my voice. I'm sucking on horehound candy to try and keep things a little bit loose. But anyway, my daughter and I went to the Ballard neighborhood in Seattle, and there's a little store there called Monster. There's another store owned by the same people called Ugly Baby, and it's down near Pike Place downtown. But Monster was easier for us to get to, and I had been there last year and picked up one of the Robert Mahar anatomical botanical embroidery patterns. And if you haven't seen these or you aren't familiar with Robert Mahar, I'll put a link to his website in the show notes. These are reproductions of anatomical prints from the 1800s. And back then, for some very weird reason, they used to illustrate the anatomical drawings with botany. So the one that I'm currently working on is an anatomical drawing of the heart, and it's got blackberries around it. So it's called Blackberry Heart. He did a series of these and there were 4 more, and I wanted the other 4 because I'm having such fun with this one. I picked those up at the store, and my daughter bought an embroidery kit because she's been doing counted cross stitch for the last year or so, but she finds it a little tedious. So she thought she might switch to embroidery. So she got a small embroidery kit to play around with and started it over Thanksgiving. On Monday, I took my daughter's car into the dealer to get some maintenance done on it, and I'm casually shopping for a replacement vehicle. I'm not in any great hurry. My current ride is a BMW station wagon, a 328 diesel, 2014. I love that car. It gets 40 miles to the gallon. I am reluctant to give up a car that gets 40 miles to the gallon, but it also has 150,000 miles on it. And yes, I know it's a diesel. It has the potential to go another 150,000 miles. But I thought I should take a look at some other cars just in case I need to replace it. So I did a little car shopping, and I went to another Hobby Lobby store and to Half Price Books. I love the Half Price bookstores in Seattle because a lot of times I can find good sewing and quilting books there. I didn't find any on this trip, but I did find a machining book for my husband. So I bought that for him. Tuesday was one of the highlights of the trip, and what I will probably spend most of this podcast talking about, and that was a class that I took at the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma, Washington. You may be familiar, if you do any garment sewing, with Kenneth D. King. He writes for Threads magazine. He's written a couple of books that have been published by Taunton Press. He is very well known in the world of fitting and drafting, and he teaches at the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma. He will be there teaching a trousers class on sometime in March, toward the end of March. So he comes out from New York City where he lives. He comes out there a couple of times a year to teach classes. I happen to be taking a private class from the other instructor, and her name is Ryla Spod. She works there full-time and teaches both group classes and private classes. And just to get my feet wet, I signed up for a 2-hour private class with her on Tuesday morning. I did email her ahead of time and explain that I'm now teaching fitting and clothing classes along with my serger classes here in Kalispell and in Missoula and Spokane. And I joked that it's a bit like the blind leading the blind because I have no formal training in this area. So any help that she could give me, especially in the area of pants fitting, would be greatly appreciated. Rylas is a wonderful teacher. Very warm, very welcoming, very matter of fact, and let's get down to business. We talked a little bit about the fact that I'll be teaching at Sew Expo in March. She's also familiar with that event. And then she brought out a tape measure, and I stripped down to my skivvies, and she took a whole set of accurate measurements for me. And we talked about how to take measurements, which measurements are crucial. It was enormously helpful to get objective feedback from somebody. I got confirmation about a few things that I had kind of intuited on my own. She also corrected some of my assumptions, which were incorrect. Having someone else who knows how to take measurements is huge. And this is no slam against my husband. He took my set of measurements last March for my Sew Expo class, and the man builds houses for a living. I know he knows how to measure things, but measuring straight lines is a lot different than measuring squishy bodies. And someone who doesn't measure squishy bodies for a living may not know how to do it properly. She was measuring the length of my arms at one point, and she said, "Oh, I need to take that measurement again. I think I wrote it down wrong." And she took it and she said, "No, you just have long arms." So that was interesting. I do know that I have long arms and a long torso. Those parts of my body are different than the national average. And those are the areas that I have to make adjustments to. 2 hours flies by quickly, even though I went in with a list of questions, and even though we spent a lot of time measuring me, probably a good hour, and talking about how to translate those measurements to patterns. I felt that it was time very well spent. I came out of there with an accurate list of my measurements and guidance on how to make adjustments to patterns. She looked at the pants patterns that I had brought with me, and we talked about the fact that on the Style Arc Linda pants, I need to move the inseam back about an inch probably. And so she showed me how to adjust my pattern. And this morning I cut out a revised version of those pants based on that revised pattern. And when I get those put together, I'm hoping that they will fit a little bit better than the other ones did. The other ones don't fit badly. It's just that the inseam is a bit far forward for me, and I think that position of that inseam is causing some wrinkles on the back. I will definitely come back to the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma to take other classes. I would love to take a class from Kenneth King. On the way over to Seattle, I listened to the So and So podcast, which is sponsored by Bernina. And if you're not familiar with that one, it's a great podcast. Meg Goodman is the host of that podcast, and she does a fabulous job. She interviewed Kenneth D. King about maybe some lesser known parts of his life and his journey to how he got to be the fitting expert that he is today. And it was a fascinating interview. I would love to take a class with him. I can't take the trousers class in March, unfortunately, but I will be watching to see what else he's going to be teaching. Rylas designed a coat pattern, and she had some sample coats there, and I tried a few of them on, and I love the way they look. So I would love to go back and take a coat class from Rylas, and I might do that sometime in the spring. I can always schedule another class with her. I could schedule a 4-hour class. I could schedule a day-long class. I have lots of ideas, and I think that having her help me with some things would be tremendously helpful. I headed over to the Joann Fabrics at the nearby Tacoma Mall. When my older daughter was a student at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, I spent a lot of time at that Joann Fabrics. I haven't been there in a couple of years, so I was curious to see what they had, and they certainly had a much better selection than any of the other Joann Fabric stores that I had been in. So it was nice to see some fabrics that I hadn't seen before. I did end up with a length of, I think I got 3 yards of an ice blue cabled sweater knit. It's a slinky rayon, and I think it's going to be a nice cardigan or maybe a pullover sweater to wear in the spring. I arranged my itinerary back to Seattle so that I could stop at Pacific Fabrics, which is in the SoDo area of Seattle, and SoDo stands for south of downtown. I used to take the light rail down there. There's a light rail stop about a block from Pacific Fabrics, and so I would take the light rail down there and get off at the SoDo stop and walk around the corner to Pacific Fabrics, but I don't feel comfortable taking the light rail in Seattle anymore. So the last couple of times that I've been there, I have driven. It's fairly easy to get to. There's a large parking lot. It's in an industrial district, so it's kind of hard to find it at first. It is not where you would expect to find a fabric store, but once you know where it is, it's a fun place to visit. You walk up some steps into a large upstairs room that has wood floors and the old style circular fabric display racks like they used to have at Joann Fabrics or Fabricland. So I like to wander around in there and just look. I did end up buying some rayon woven, a light fabric for making a blouse. It's kind of a denim-y colored flower print, and I think it'll make a nice blouse to wear with a pair of jeans. I could really go nuts buying fabric in a store like that, so I kind of have to hold myself back. I have plenty of fabric. I don't need to buy any more. When I go to those kinds of stores, I try to limit myself to 1 or 2 really nice pieces of fabric. Wednesday was an interesting day. I left my Airbnb in Seattle and went to the Edmonds Ferry Terminal because I was planning to take the ferry from Edmonds over to Kingston, which is on the Olympic Peninsula. It's a ferry ride of about a half an hour. I've done it many times before. My older daughter's in-laws live on the peninsula, and we were all planning to get together there to celebrate Thanksgiving. I got to the ferry terminal in plenty of time to get on a ferry. The state of Washington is having some issues with their ferry system. They are down a couple of boats, and so this route normally would have one boat going in each direction about every half an hour, 45 minutes or so. They were down to one boat, and so they were only traveling from Edmonds about every hour and a half. And it wasn't a problem going over to the peninsula, but coming back on Friday, it was a problem, and I'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. But I got on the ferry and remembered that my daughter had told me that I should check and see if District Fabric in Port Townsend was open on Wednesday, because I had planned to stop there on my way to my daughter's in-laws. So I pulled District Fabrics up on my phone, and lo and behold, they were closed on Wednesday. So there went that idea. I had to come up with another idea. So I decided to get off the ferry on the Kingston side and drive down to Silverdale, which was about half an hour or 45 minutes south of where I was. I've never been to Silverdale before, but it's near Bremerton, and there's a large, I think, a naval base there, and so there's a lot of shopping there. I stopped in at Hobby Lobby, and then I went to the Joann Fabrics there, and oh my goodness, the Joann Fabrics. It was like Disneyland. If you are lucky enough to live in a large metropolitan area, you may have a Joann Fabrics that is one of their new concept stores. It's based on their store in Columbus, Ohio. I have only been in one of those kinds of stores once before, and that was last June when we were in Portland. We went to a Joann Fabrics, and it was one of their concept stores, and so is the one in Silverdale. What makes it different from a regular Joann Fabrics store is the displays are well labeled, and everything is neatly organized into types of fabrics. So all the apparel fabrics are in one area. The knits are in another area. Everything is just, it's easy to find things there. And I found quite a few things that I could have gone home with. I confined myself to buying some stretch contour swimsuit fabric. And the reason that I bought that is because it's similar to power mesh. And I've been experimenting with power mesh instead of elastic in the waistbands of my yoga pants and the pull-on pants that I've been making. So like the Linda Style Arc pants, I've been using the power mesh in those, and I like it better than the elastic. So I thought I would try this contour swimsuit fabric. The best way to describe it is it's similar to what they make Spanx out of. And they had it in nude, and they had it in a burgundy color. So I got a yard of each just to bring it home and play around with it. And I wandered around and looked at the store and wished that we had something like that closer to where I live. It's really a shame that Joann Fabrics hasn't invested more into making more of their stores look like that. I said something to the young woman at the cut counter. They had 3 people cutting fabric. The store was well staffed. When you get to the cut counter, you enter your name into a kiosk, and it comes up on a screen so that you can see when it's your turn to have your fabric cut. I was impressed with all of it. On the way to my daughter's in-laws' house, by this time it was a little bit after lunch, there were 2 Walmarts that I wanted to stop at in between, and I just thought I would check and see what their remnant racks look like. So I stopped at the first one, which was about 15 miles from my daughter's in-laws' house. And I walked in, and who should be standing right in the front of the store but my daughter? That was really bizarre. So we said hello and hugged and found out that they were down there running some errands for her mother-in-law, and we made plans to meet up at her in-laws' house a little bit later, and I headed off to the other Walmart to see what was on that remnant rack. So all told, I hit 7 Walmart stores and 6 Joann Fabric stores. I picked up probably 8 remnants at Walmart and a couple of lengths of fabric at Joann's, and that was it for my fabric shopping. I also got a couple of patterns. I got the Grainline Studio Pharaoh dress pattern at Pacific Fabrics in Seattle. That looks like it'll be a fun one, although I haven't decided what fabric I'm going to use for that one yet. My younger daughter and her boyfriend came over Wednesday afternoon. They didn't go to the same ferry terminal that I went to. They went to the downtown Seattle ferry terminal and took the ferry over to Bainbridge Island and then drove from Bainbridge Island over a bridge to get to my older daughter's in-laws' house. And we spent a wonderful Thanksgiving with them. They're great people. I love them. I love spending time with them. I only get to see them once a year, maybe twice a year if I go over in the summer. But we had a great time. It was good to see everyone and visit with everyone. And my daughter's mother-in-law is a phenomenal cook. So she and I sat in the kitchen and visited while she prepared Thanksgiving dinner. Their dishwasher had gone out Tuesday night, so I did the dishes while she cooked, and we got to visit, and we had a great time. On Friday morning, my younger daughter and her boyfriend and I drove about an hour to Port Townsend on the way back to Seattle. And Port Townsend is a darling little town with a lot of shops, including District Fabric. And I had been there last spring with my daughter's mother-in-law. We met in Port Townsend, and she took me to District Fabric, and I wanted to visit again. And they were having a Black Friday sale where everything was 25% off. I was good. I bought another sweater knit. That seems to be the theme of this time of the year. I'm having great fun sewing up sweater knits. I haven't decided what I'm going to make with it. It's got a little cable pattern on it. And again, I think this is hysterical that I'm sewing up sweaters instead of knitting them. And some of them even have cables on them. I also bought the Thread Theory Comox boxer short pattern just because I'm going to try making my husband a pair of boxer shorts just for the fun of it. Although he told me that if he really, really likes them, I'm going to have to make him a whole bunch. So I may be setting myself up for a lot of extra work, but that's okay. Because the one ferry route was down a boat, I decided not to try and go back through Kingston to Edmonds. So all 3 of us, because my daughter and her boyfriend were in their car and I was in my car, we all headed back to the Bainbridge Island ferry terminal, which even though they were running 2 boats on that route, they were way behind. There's just a lot of traffic over Thanksgiving weekend. So we were a little bit late getting back to Seattle, but we made our dinner reservation and we went out to dinner at a restaurant called Ray's, which has great seafood. And that was my birthday dinner because Friday was my birthday. On Saturday, my daughter and her boyfriend and I went to the Christmas market in downtown Seattle. We walked around and ate lunch there, and that was a lot of fun. And then I went back to the Airbnb and did a little bit of sewing before my daughter came over and had dinner with me. And then Sunday morning, I woke up really early, got on the road about 6 a.m., I was over Snoqualmie Pass before the worst of the traffic started, and I was back home here in Montana by dinner time. It was a great trip. I had a lot of fun. I did some fabric shopping. I took a class. It was everything that I wanted it to be for my birthday. I'm actually heading back to Coeur d'Alene to the Spokane area. Coeur d'Alene is in Idaho, Spokane's in Washington. They're about 25 miles apart. I'm heading back to Coeur d'Alene on Sunday afternoon because on Monday I am enrolled in a class with Amanda Murphy. And I am really excited about taking this class because I love Amanda Murphy's quilt rulers. I use them all the time on my Q20, and I'm just thrilled that I was able to get a spot in a class with Amanda Murphy because that's next to impossible. She doesn't come to this part of the country very often. We'd love to get her to come to Kalispell, but she's booking probably 3 and 4 years out. So I got into this class and I don't have to wait, and I'm really excited about it. I do want to mention a couple of books that I am in the middle of looking at and reading. The first one is by Johanna Lundström, and I think she's in Sweden. She's phenomenal. She wrote a book called Master the Cover Stitch. If you have a cover stitch machine, get that book. She lays out everything you need to know about how to use a cover stitch machine, tips and techniques. She's also written a book on making jeans, and she's written a book on athletic wear. And her latest book, which she did in conjunction with a woman named Melina Herpe, H-J-E-R-P-E, who is also Swedish, I believe. The two of them wrote a book called Fit for Knits. And what makes this book so amazing is that they self-published it. And I love self-publishing because that's how all of my books were produced. It's 255 pages. It's over an inch thick. It is so well done, so professionally laid out. There is so much good information in it. If you do any sewing with knits, if you do any kind of alterations, you absolutely have to have this book. I cannot give it any higher praise. You can get it on Amazon. I think this is going to end up being a reference book for people who sew with knits for years to come. 20 years from now, people will probably still be referencing it. That's how good it is. Again, the author's name is Johanna Lundström. She has a website at thelaststitch.com. She's also got a YouTube channel. You might also want to watch the video that they made, the live stream that they made for the launch date of the book, which was a couple of weeks ago. And I wasted no time. I went straight to Amazon and ordered myself a copy. The other book that I'm reading is by Claire Hunter, and it is called Embroidering Her Truth. I saw the paperback version of this book in a bookstore in Port Townsend and looked it up on my iPad, and Apple iBooks had it for $1.99. So I bought it. It's part of the reason I bought it was because when we went to London and Edinburgh in June of 2019, we were at Holyrood Castle and getting a tour of the castle when the tour guide said, she was showing us the room where Mary Queen of Scots had been imprisoned, and she said Mary Queen of Scots used to do embroidery during her Privy Council meetings because she hated to sit at those meetings and not be productive. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a woman after my own heart, because I will not sit in a meeting unless I have some knitting with me or some kind of handwork. It's literally the only way I can get through a meeting and still be sane. And here Mary Queen of Scots was doing that hundreds of years ago to get through her Privy Council meetings. When I saw the book, I thought, oh, I need to read this. I bought the book and I'm enjoying it thoroughly, and I have to read a passage to you because this really spoke to me. And this is for all of you who have ever been criticized for having an overly large fabric stash. So again, this is from Embroidering Her Truth by Claire Hunter. Cloth was a currency in its own right. Deposit banks, as we know them today, did not exist until the second half of the 17th century. Instead, the rich safeguarded their wealth in other ways. The value of luxury textiles and their embellishments made them a viable alternative to coinage. They could be sold, exchanged, pawned, or act as surety against loans. Henry VIII spent nearly as much on cloth as he did on his artillery. It was a guaranteed source of material affluence and monetary defense. In a century assailed by economic volatility and sudden fluctuations in the supply of imported goods, fabric could lie undisturbed by political, financial, or social turbulence. It retained its value. Fabric was also an appreciable payment in kind. Servants and officials were remunerated not only in money, but in cloth and clothing, the monetary worth of both often exceeding what household members received in wages. Livery's distinctive colors and design branded its wearer with the mark of royal protection and privilege. Gifts of other clothing and textiles indicated a monarch's favor and demonstrated their largesse. Given the volume of textiles that circulated within a court and the expenditure such transactions incurred, courts maintained their own workshops and permanent teams of wardrobe staff. So hoard that fabric. You never know when it might become a form of currency again. That is what I have for today's episode. I know it was kind of fragmented. I apologize again for my voice. I'm trying to get used to this dry Montana air after being near the water for a week. Hopefully by next week I should be back to normal. Expect a review and recap of my Amanda Murphy class next week. I also have a couple of interviews coming up, so those will be showing up soon. And who knows what else will show up on the podcast. It's always an adventure. You can find the show notes for today's episode at thestraightstitchpodcast.com. You can also get there by going to my website, janetzabo.com, where you can read my blog. I've got pictures from my trip up on the blog, as well as some additional information. I appreciate the people who have left reviews on iTunes. That's fantastic. The podcast seems to be getting some traction and getting some downloads. So if you've shared it with your friends, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we will talk again next week. And until then, I hope you get to go sew something.